Return, O virgin daughter of Israel, to these your highways by which you went. Welcome to Reunion Roadmap, a place to discover the people and communities along the highway of restoration for Israel's house of Joseph. Reunion Roadmap is a B'nai Yosef North America production. Be our guest for the next hour as we meet the people of the emerging house of Joseph here in North America. This is Stefania Pappas with B'nai Yosef North America, and with me is Al McCarn, our Executive Director, and we're going to part 2 in our interview with Barry Miller, and he is going to be talking about some very interesting things that it may really cause the antennas to go up for our listeners. Isn't that right, Al?
Oh, I'm sure it will, because in this segment of our three-part visit, Barry and I go into historical events of the 50-year cycles. And, you know, he's got his opinion on when the Jubilee happens, and he lays that out pretty clearly in this interview. The spoiler alert, he's looking at 2029, you know. so he's looking, we have talked about, and we'll continue to talk about in this interview, the 50-year cycles that he's observed going back to 1973, 1923, 1873 before that. It's real good history nerd stuff in this segment, but there are some practical things that we get into, and we'll get into some more of those practical things in the conclusion of our interview next week. Now, we start out with Barry explaining what is the missing manna moment. That's how we ended the first segment last week. The question is, as we're all looking around and seeing gas prices not just going through the roof, going out into the outer space, you know, as we're seeing housing crises and employment crises and supply chain crises, and everything is a crisis, and wars and rumors of wars, everyone is asking, what's going on? How do we live? How do we survive? This is not just paycheck to paycheck. This is getting into real crisis level. Is that what you're seeing, Stefania?
Yeah, you could say on a personal level, we're seeing it too. So, yeah, I would actually say it's all over. Even in our small little community that we live in, the same exact scenarios are developing, and the same issues as well.
That it is. I would say this is a message of exhortation and encouragement for believers. This is a time to become the community of our God that we are supposed to be, to help each other out.
Yes, true.
Yeah. How else do we get through this time?
Yeah.
Now, what exactly does this time mean? Well, that's why we're going to Ephrata, Pennsylvania, to talk to Barry Miller. He has been thinking about this for 30 years or more. You know, as a successful businessman and as a student, a disciple of Yeshua and a student of the Word of God, I think he brings a lot to the table, a lot of practical advice of, you know, how to live day by day. And it all comes down to get on your knees and humbly appeal to heaven, because it is the humble one whom the Lord will lift up. Those aren't just spiritual platitudes. Yes. That's how we get through this time. So that's our introduction, and now we can go on and continue our talk with Barry Miller.
So ultimately what happened after I had those three stories, this 1973, 1923, and 1873, I started to realize there was a biblical pattern, and the biblical pattern was the manna from the seventh day. That the seventh day of manna, you would go out looking for manna if you hadn't gathered double in day 6, and that manna wasn't there to be found. You know, God told them through Moses they were to gather double, and there wouldn't be any manna on the seventh day. But it tells us that some went out to look for manna, and it wasn't there. Well, here we are. And it's the same scenario. Our fathers went looking for 25-cent gas, and it wasn't there. it was the missing manna at that moment. And so what I'm saying to everyone now is, we potentially have a situation where 2-3 years from now, we might find ourselves in a situation where something we expect to be there, that's always been there, might go missing. It won't be a stock market collapse or a bust like maybe we've been used to seeing, but more along the lines of something just goes missing, which really messes us up economically. So that's the caution I'm giving everyone at this point about the cycle.
I think it's a very good caution. Now, thinking as the political and military historian, with every year that you've mentioned, I'm thinking of other events. 1873, 74, the U.S. Grant administration was racked with scandal, including the Teapot Dome scandal that brought down several of his cabinet cabinet officers. We don't say ministers in the United States, secretaries. And then 1923, 24, and so on, as the German Empire is being dismembered and the Weimar Republic is coming into being, and you mentioned the reparations from the Treaty of Versailles ending World War I. Germany didn't pay that off until 2010 or 2012. But yes, rampant printing of money, and concomitantly, at the same time, the San Remo Treaty of 1923 is what dismembered the Ottoman Empire and transferred Palestine to Great Britain as a mandate. Britain, which had come behind the idea of a Jewish homeland in Palestine with the Balfour Declaration. The Russian Empire was dismembered. The Russian Civil War was going on, and atheistic communism was rising there. So that's 1923, 24, going all the way up to 1929, crash of 29, global depression. And then I think 50 years ahead, further on, the world is changing there as well. We get to the height of the Cold War. We have in the United States an embattled president, the first one ever to be impeached, Richard Nixon. Well, almost impeached, excuse me. Andrew Johnson was impeached in 1869.
Right.
And Richard Nixon resigned before he could be impeached. And who came to the presidency? Gerald R. Ford, a president who was never elected.
Right.
Because Nixon's original vice president, Spiro Agnew, had to resign under a cloud because he had done some naughty things. Gerald Ford was a senator from Michigan who was appointed as vice president under the 25th Amendment by President Nixon. He is the one who became president in 1974, finished out that term, and following him came Jimmy Carter of Georgia. And from 1977 to 81, when Ronald Reagan was in power, it was one disaster after another for the Carter administration. Just one disaster after another. The only, gave away the Panama Canal. That raised some eyebrows and anger. There was stagflation. Stagnant economy with rising inflation. Everything was costing more. Your dollar was worth less. There was the Iranian hostage crisis when in 1979, the Iranian Revolution happened and the U.S. Embassy in Tehran was stormed, and many U.S. Embassy workers were kept for 444 days as hostages. Then we had the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, 1979. The only bright spot of the Carter administration was the Camp David Accords, with Jimmy Carter brokering that peace between Egypt and Israel. Well, okay, so let's go forward to here we are, 2022. Barry, I'm seeing headlines about the Fed raising interest rates 75 points, 0.75 of a point. I'm seeing rampant inflation. I'm seeing a presidential administration that half of the country considers illegitimate. I'm seeing an Iranian regime that is on the verge of a nuclear weapon if they don't have one already, and the world turning against Israel, and the war drums are beating day by day. I'm seeing a change in the global geopolitical system where the American century is over, What's next? The Chinese century? The Chinese, Russian, Iranian century? I don't know. But it sure does look like we have come to a 50-year cycle of transition.
Yeah, that is actually, what I think is coming. However, I think we have a seventh set of 7 years here in front of us before we get to that Jubilee. Just to go back to why I think 2979 is a Jubilee, for me, it started simply with, reading Deuteronomy and Leviticus and then saying, well, where is this? Way back in 1991. And the first three dates I came up with, as amazing as it is, was the fall of 29, the fall of 79, the fall of 87. And the fall of 87 was the one that I remembered the most because in the fall of 87, I had just bought a house and I just made a deal to buy a business. And I was in hock up to my eyeballs. And on October 19th, 1979, the stock market dropped 22.5% in one day. And I remember watching the TV that night and asking myself, are the Millers just unlucky? That was my response. Because you see, my grandfather, who had been orphaned as a very young man, had fought his way into a position to buy a farm in the late 1920s, only to lose it in the Great Depression. And so I was thinking about my grandfather that night and saying, am I just about to repeat my grandfather's scenario? Because my grandparents lived very close as a result of that turn as many did who went through the Great Depression. And what I found, though, was that, Deuteronomy 31:10 tells us very clearly that the end of the seventh year is at the Feast of Tabernacles. And so I knew that this remission of debt was in the fall. I didn't know what year it was, but I knew it was in the fall. And so the first two dates I connected to it were the fall of 29 and the fall of 87. But then I had a problem, like, okay, how do I connect them? They're 58 years apart. And the only thing I come up with is 2930 is a Jubilee, 7980 is a Jubilee. That makes 87 the end of the seventh year in the first cycle. Now, that's a lot of numbers, and it's going to be hard for you to think through that maybe. But the point was, I wanted to know at that point, what happened in the fall of 1979 economically? And you just talked a little bit about Jimmy Carter. So Jimmy Carter appoints Paul Volcker to the Fed that summer of 79. In the summer of 79, if you wanted to build a house in some parts of the United States, you had to give the contractor the money before you started because he had to buy everything before the inflation caught him. He couldn't build it and buy as he built it, or inflation would wreck his price. So you had to give him money up front, and he'd build your house. That's how inflation was running. And Volcker was doing everything he could think of to get rid of that inflation, but he didn't know what to do about it. And on October 6, 1979, he called a meeting of the Federal Open Market Committee, and that was a Saturday morning, and it also happened to be, I think, one of the first days of Tabernacles. And they put out a memo that nobody quite knew what to make of, but it basically said, we will no longer control the interest rates. We will now just control the amount of money in the system, which basically meant we're going to turn the tap shut, just close it. And over the next 3 months, interest rates went to 20%. And, everything that happened that we remember about Paul Volcker squeezing inflation out of the system, which is somewhat similar to what's going on now, although hopefully not to the same degree. But that's what happened in 79. And that gave me 3 data points early on, 29, 79, 87. And then from that point on, I said, I'm going to do what I can to be out of debt in 94, 2001, 2008, 2015, 2022. That was just how I thought about it. I didn't have the Hillel calendar or anything we talked about earlier. I was just looking at it from the standpoint of what I was seeing economically in the history books, comparing it to Deuteronomy 15 and Leviticus 25. So that's why I think we're sitting here at the beginning of the seventh set of sevens and finishing up the sixth set of sevens, really.
What then are the practical considerations that you would suggest?
Well, I simply want people to be aware that we may be facing a missing manna moment in 23, 24. And I just don't want people to think that, hey, the market's down hard here, and when we get to November, I'm going to go full in or whatever, that you understand that there may still be a missing manna moment in front of us. And, really, when it comes down to it, with what's going on in Ukraine and Russia, that manna may actually be wheat. That may actually be food. Who knows what it's going to be. Obviously, it doesn't always take the same pattern, and I don't know. But I just felt impressed that I needed to put this out for people, especially for my readers, that they understand that don't go full risk on in December this year. Be awake, be aware of what could be coming at us because of this scenario.
In other words, that which we have expected before, what we could have counted on, may not be there. Things may be different.
Be aware, be awake, and be aware that could be the case. Yeah.
Okay. Barry, 20 years ago, I read a book called The Final Quest by Rick Joyner. It was my introduction to dreams and visions. And one thing that Rick said in the book, and this was a lengthy vision that he had received in the 80s for the end of the age, what's happening to the church at the end of the age. But a lot of images from what he shared have stuck with me over the last 2 decades. One of them was economic unrest. And he had seen a picture of people walking off a cliff. And that's the people who were proceeding through the economy in the way that they always had. And it was cloudy and foggy, and it was hard to see their way forward, but they just moved as they had before and ended up walking off the cliff. Now, there were some who were on their knees moving forward with caution, and they found the paths that would take them down the cliff to safety. Now, his interpretation of this is how the people of God should act, is with humility on your knees, asking the Lord what step to take next. I think that's sound counsel, regardless what you may think of Rick Joyner and his end times prophetic analysis.
Yeah.
No, that's just sound advice at any time. And as I'm looking at the incredible chaos and transition out there right now, with broken supply chains and political, military, economic, social unrest, how can the people of God move forward at all if we are not on our knees, humbly asking him for guidance with every single step? And I hear that counsel in what you're telling us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't want to in any way lessen that counsel. I think that's really, really important. I will say, however, and this is just my observation of the household of faith, we're conservative.
Mm-hmm.
We're cautious. That's who we are. And what I want to point out is that, having taken some risk in 2002, 2003, with an eye to being, deleveraged by 2007 was a good idea. And again, to take some risk in 2009, 2010 to be deleveraged by 2015 was a good idea. And again, to take some risk in 2016, 2017 and be deleveraged for 2022 was a good idea. And that also is what I want to tell people is, you don't always be scared of your own shadow. Be like Joseph and know when to stick your neck out there and when to say, this is my moment, I'm going to shine. All I'm really saying, and that's kind of what I said in the book, as much as, take that risk, right? And all I'm saying here is give it a couple extra years here. This one worries me. This one has a pattern that's a little different than the other. This is a 7. Be aware of this missing manna pattern and adjust accordingly.
Yeah, I think that's the best we can do.
Right.
It's not a good idea to give specifics and details and spin the scenarios. All we can say is we are in unprecedented times. Even those of us who are over 50 years old, these are unprecedented times. So, but there are opportunities. And that's another thing that you emphasize in your book. In fact, you were just talking about that. There are opportunities there.
Right.
Any suggestions on how to find those?
Yeah, well, okay. So think this through for me. I mean, you're a military guy. You're a historical guy. I'm going to ask you, if we get a missing manna moment around the world that has to do with food stuff, are we not going to move borders of countries, especially in the Far East, where the food that we're talking about being missing is what coming out of Russia and Ukraine?
Here's Gregory Brown with Unfulfilled. If you're interested in hearing more of Greg's music, you can email him at gregory.brown7@outlook.com. And now, Unfulfilled.
As we enter in this journey of discovery, holy convocation, we glorify His name. For it's with great anticipation that we wait on Him. The watchman, He will signal us that day. On that day. When the shofar sounds the first day of the Tishrei moon, as the watchman calls out loud for all to hear, for we know the time is coming and it's coming soon, for the King of Kings' return is drawing near. It's drawing near. It's drawing near. For the time will come, the Lion's return with His rod of iron, His judgment on earth. From His mouth He strikes with a two-edged sword. The dark angels fall. It's the day of the Lord. The millennial reign, it's approaching fast. When the watchman sounds his shofar blast, as the wicked fall, the righteous will sing. Adonai Yeshua, conquering King. Adonai Yeshua, conquering King. The two sticks have now been regathered as one, back to the promised land where it all will be done. Now all of this starts with the sound of His horn, with the watchman's shofar blast, with the watchman's shofar blast. So we've been warned. For the time will come, the Lion's return with His rod of iron, His judgment on earth. From His mouth He strikes with a two-edged sword. The dark angels fall. It's the day of the Lord. The millennial reign, it's approaching fast. When the watchman sounds his shofar blast, when the wicked fall, the righteous will sing. Adonai Yeshua, conquering King. Adonai Yeshua, conquering King. Adonai Yeshua,
Shalom, everyone. Welcome to the mid-rise portion of today's Reunion Roadmap. With me today is David Jones from Florida. David, how are you?
Doing great, brother. Doing great. Looking forward to what we're getting into today.
All right. By the way, this is Barry Phillips from Virginia. I think I forgot to mention that. Just the voice on the radio. Who in the world?
Yes, Lord.
Psalms 139, verse 14, may be something that is a bit on folks' minds these days, which says, I give thanks to you, for I am awesomely and wondrously made. Fearfully and wonderfully is another translation. In the womb, there is an amazing process by which a conceived life begins to form. It's amazing, David, that very early on in the course of a pregnancy, that the definitions of the human body, its fingers, its facial features, heartbeat, bodily organs are being formed and put in place. And when a baby is born, we rejoice. Well, it has all its fingers and toes. But there's more to it than that. It's an amazing thing. I have my latest grandchild is 8 months old, and I remember, you hold a little one newly born, and you realize a month ago it was this life was still inside the mother's womb. We look at this and we realize there has to be a master creator. I mean, this whole human process cannot possibly, in any intelligent mind, no one could possibly imagine that a spatial blob collision accident created this process. It's just not possible. So life conceived in the womb, brought forth. It's a miracle. It's an amazing event. It's a spectacle of wonder. But David, what about the life outside the womb? There is a verse in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 1. In verse 5, he says, this voice came to me saying, before I formed you in the belly, I knew you. And before you came out of the womb, I did set you apart. I appointed you a prophet to nations. When Yirmiyahu was an infant or a toddler or a little boy, it's doubtful that he had any idea of what was sitting in front of him. The trials he would go through, the life he would live, the words that would be remembered for thousands of years. Not everybody lives for that level of import and impact. But even the least of us, David, have a reason for existence. If life in the womb is just fetal tissue until it becomes a living being outside the womb, doesn't that cheapen the life that takes place after birth? If we recognize the hand of the Creator, does it not give us a sense of responsibility and accountability to do something with this life that we have been given? Life's not cheap. So we shouldn't live it cheaply, should we?
Wow, that's an awful lot of stuff to get in here to set up.
You're welcome.
Yeah. I mean, I think your last question there, I think the direct answer is no. I mean, absolutely not. But how do we do that? And whose perspective are we following to live our life and to do these things? Yeshua was constantly asked about, so what's important in life? Which we would translate today as, why am I really here?
Right.
And Yeshua would answer these questions as the greatest commandment of all. If the one most important thing I need to remember, what is it? Yeshua said, Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your mind. And there's another one that's on par with this one. Love your neighbor as yourself. These two things show the heart of Yah to us. And it's that relationship. He put us here for relationship. With him, yes, but with each other as well. And all this working together into one. So how do we live life now that we're here, and what do we do? Ultimately, we're not living for our temporal life. We're living for eternity. And we're living to partake of not the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but to partake of the tree of life.
Right.
Which we know we also say is synonymous with Yeshua in himself anyway. So what is this about me? And there's another thing, sticking with Jeremiah, in Jeremiah 29, and people like to take this and kind of use it out of context, but I'm going to put it this way in the lines with what I'm saying. It says, I know the plans that I have in mind for you, declares Adonai, plans for shalom, not calamity, to give you a future and a hope. And you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you search for me with all your heart, and I will be found by you.
Yes.
And then it goes on in verse 14, again, context, right? And I will return you from exile, gather you from the nations, all the places where I've driven you, bring you back to the place. I mean, so what is the goal here? The goal is relationship. And we're not just looking to someday in the future somehow, we'll have this relationship with the one that created us. No, this relationship here now. And that's why we have to learn to also teach to our children the beauty of this relationship that Yahweh created them for. And it's that we in that we're giving identity, we are giving purpose, we are giving everything that we are doing here now, because this is the way that Yahweh designed you, created you. Yeshua said abundantly. How does that happen? By following him. Yeshua said, my sheep know my voice and they follow me. So what is it that he wants us to do in life? To follow him. But what does that look like? What did Yeshua come to do? What is the purpose here? If Yeshua came to bring us back to a place of relationship with the Father and to call those in the covenant, I mean, how do we live that way? Well, now we can go back to Deuteronomy, and I think it's chapter 10, Deuteronomy 10. Let me get here really quick. Deuteronomy 10, verse 12. So now, Israel, what does Adonai your God require of you? You ever ask a question like that? Let me paraphrase it. God, what do you want from me? Or God, I don't know what to do. What should I do here? Which that's what we're talking about. We're talking about plans. We're talking about purpose. And we can get so caught up in this thing of purpose that we can paralyze ourselves. It's like, I don't want to do anything outside of God's plan for me. So therefore, I'm not going to do anything at all. And I'm not going to get a cup of coffee until God tells me it's okay to get a cup of coffee, because if he doesn't say it, then he doesn't want me to do this, and a glass of water in the morning. And I mean, all these things, we can get really hung up on these things. But continuing in Deuteronomy 10, it says, what does God want from you? To fear Adonai your God, walk in all his ways, and love him. And you go on and continue to read that, to serve Adonai with all your heart and all your soul, to keep his mitzvot and his statutes for your own good. I mean, all these things are going in here, but this is the point, to walk in his ways and love him. And I think that's along those lines of, why am I here? That's why you're here, to walk in his ways and to love him.
David, I read a number of years ago, a Torah commentary, a rabbinical commentary. And it was talking about that at the moment, the very instant of conception in the womb, at that microsecond, Yah places a soul from his presence into what scientists call the embryo. That when life is instantly conceived, at that very instant, life from heaven is also deposited into that being. So the soul does not enter into the baby at birth. It's at the very instant of creation. And thinking about that, the soul that is in the babe comes from the presence of Yah. In fact, every living being on the planet, every living person on the planet has a soul that was sourced from the very presence of the Most High. In response to that, it was talking about when Moshe was on the mount and asked to see the face of the Creator and was told, no one can see my face and live. It's not that the face of the Creator was so horrible in the holy aspect of that word, the sheer terror of the holy type thing, that it would kill you to look at him. It's that your soul that was sourced with him would immediately leave the human body for the preference of being back at the place where it was originally created. That the soul within us prefers greatly the presence of the Most High over life in the human body. So it was that Moshe's soul would fly from his body to go back to its source. That is ultimately the yearning of mankind, that the soul that is in us, placed there in the womb, wants to reattach with its source and meaningfully connect, move, operate, live in the light of that source. It's in the human capacity of embracing this world and those around it that we get confused as to how to do that. Somehow our brain tells us, or our flesh tells us, it's in the pursuit of pleasure, or it's in the acts of vengeance in behalf of this misunderstood one, or any long list of faulty reactions. It is the Torah that gives us the proper outline and understanding as to how to rightly connect again with our source, and to reveal to us through the Torah the one who redeems the inward being so that that soul can rightly connect. Trying to connect with Yah in the soul level without a renewing of your being, it's like trying to put mud on a white linen tablecloth and keep it clean. It just doesn't work.
I like that picture. That's a good one. You know, it comes back to, where do we originate from? Where do we come from? And we come from Yahweh. I mean, in the very, very beginning, Yah breathed into man and created a living soul. When Moshe was praying, you know, he would pass, and there would be another leader, and he prayed, and he said again, and this is back in Numbers 27. He says, let Yahweh, the God of the spirits of all flesh, appoint someone to be over the congregation. And I like that phrase, the God of the spirits of all flesh. He is the God of all of us, body, soul, and flesh.
Yes.
And he is the one who knows us all. So therefore, we are subject to what he desires for us. And that is going to be something that is from the womb forward until we return to him. And it's what's the name of that call? You know, the where we're so hung up on the destination that we forget the importance of the journey.
Absolutely. Yes.
You know, we're so caught up on, if I could only do this, and if I could only do that, and if I could only make it to here, that we are forgetting the importance of how he wants us to live today for him, here and now. You know, again, not just live, but have a life that's worth living, as Yeshua said.
David, unfortunately, we have run over our time a bit. So, folks, thank you for listening to our Midrash. If you have questions or comments, you can reach us at Reunion Roadmap at MannaYosefNA.com. And we look forward to being with you again next week.
Cindy Howard Delgado is the featured vocalist in Whom Have I by House of Aaron from their album Walk Beside Me, available at houseofaaron.org.
Until I entered the sanctuary, my feet almost slipped, and my heart was grieved, and my spirit felt betrayed. Until I entered the sanctuary, my heart almost failed. Then you drew me near and took my fear away. Father, whom have I in heaven but you? Father, whom have I in heaven but you? But you. Until I entered the sanctuary, my effort seemed vain, while the arrogant seemed to prosper and to gain. Until I entered the sanctuary, I envied their ways. Then you filled my void with
That was the house of Aaron. Whom have I? Zephaniah, our friends at the house of Aaron, put together some quality products when it comes to music like this. And who would have thought it? These folks from out in western Utah, right on the Nevada state line, out of the desert comes some fantastic worship music. And there's testimony in that song. Whom do we have but our King to trust in? That's a similar message as we heard from Gregory Brown with his original piece, Unfulfilled. And then the Midrash, as Barry Phillips and David Jones were talking about, I like the title. I'm here. Now what?
Yeah.
What is it that struck a chord with you from the Midrash?
Well, it's like the Hebrew word that hits me is hineni. You know, it's that one of those, here I am here. And they just add the, what now? Us humans are extremely curious. We want to know what's next. And
Yes.
And sometimes because we don't really walk in faith, we're not content until we know what's next. We can't leave that in mystery and let him reveal it when it is. So I'm just saying, okay, I'm here.
The motivation for the Midrash is, it's pretty clear when you were hearing it. It's the recent Supreme Court decision overturning Roe versus Wade.
Yes.
So now all of a sudden, the question of life and the meaning of life confronts us on a new level.
Yes.
The status quo has been overturned. What was normal for 50 years is now no longer normal. And every state, every county, every city, every congregation, we've all got to wrestle with this now.
Right.
And it's pretty clear, as I understand what our elders said, and I agree with them, that when our God says, choose life that you may live, that means he's got a high priority on life. Why? Just for the sake of us living and breathing and existing? No, it's the relationship aspect.
Yes.
It's the get to know your God, get to know your brother and sister, the neighbors all around you. Zephaniah, I got to confess, I'm not very good at that. Are you?
We have gotten much better. We have several neighbors now that we've really connected with and we're being in touch with because, and one neighbor even expressed during these times how important it is to, to be in contact with one another, help one another out. So, yes.
That's a thing we can connect to Barry Miller's discussion, the need to help one another out, the need to understand what we have expected to be there in terms of supply. Well, it may not be. How do we get by?
Yeah.
That's why God put us in community, and we are inextricably linked with one another.
Yes.
I think that's what it means to be in a body. Is that right?
I think so. Yes.
Well, this brings us to the end of another episode of Reunion Roadmap. Thank you all for listening. We do appreciate our audience. Do check out our website if you haven't been there, to BneyYosefNA.com, BneyYosefNA.com. Check out our resources. We do have a donate button. If you are blessed and would like to partner with us, we would greatly appreciate whatever the Spirit may move you to do. And even if not, come on back next week and listen again, because we will have another new show on Reunion Roadmap. So on behalf of Zephaniah Pappas, Barry Phillips, and David Jones, this is Al McCarn. Shavua Tov.
Thank you for joining us on Reunion Roadmap, a production of B'nai Yosef North America. Please come back next week for another visit with the people of the emerging House of Joseph here in North America.